Frank Stockton uses a prince's forced choice to talk a little bit more about love and morality. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, so I want to talk about a short story of interest, one that was recommended to me, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. Today's short story is all about royalty and love. I am referring to The Discourager of Hesitancy, great title, by Frank Stockton, which was written around 1885. I've talked about Frank Stockton on this channel before, so I don't need to go into that great of detail, but he was a writer, a humorist. He frequently wrote about morality and the irrationality of all of our choices. And I talked about one of his stories on this channel before, The Lady or the Tiger, which was really good. Basically a short story about a princess who falls in love with a commoner. Her king dad doesn't like that, and so she forces a choice where she knows the answer to the question, but her commoner boyfriend needs to pick between a lady who he'll have to marry or a tiger, which could kill him. And so the princess knows the answer and has to kind of help him, but does she want to help him, get married to another person? That's a good question. And that's a little bit continued in this short story today. This short story was actually recommended to me by Great Suing. They commented on my Lady or the Tiger video and said, hey, you should read the sequel. And I didn't know about this sequel, so I'm very thrilled to be talking about it today. So thanks to them. And so now, without further ado, let's talk about The Discourager of Hesitancy. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Discourager of Hesitancy focuses, initially, it starts by focusing on five diplomats who visit a kingdom that was referenced in the first story that belongs to the barbaric king. The diplomats said that one of their countrymen was in the city, in the kingdom, for the Lady or the Tiger arena situation. But the countryman was too scared to, find out what happened, or what would happen. And so they left before they found out the answer, and the diplomats want to know the answer to that question. And the king thinks for a moment and then says that he'll help them understand it by telling them another story entirely. And so the king begins talking about a prince who visited the kingdom not long ago. The prince heard that the king had staffed the court with a bunch of beautiful maidens, just wonderful maidens. And so the prince heard about this and wanted to marry one of them. He goes to the king and asks the king if he can have his choice, and the king says that he'll arrange a test for the prince, and basically if the prince chooses right or passes this test, he'll be able to marry one of the fair maidens, which is pretty nice. But the prince is sort of rushed off to another room, made to dress up for the wedding, which will take place tomorrow. He's a little worried because that's not how weddings are supposed to go. He wants to make his choice to find out if it's a good match with one of these maidens. But the king says no to that. And all the staff are like, we're not going to go against the king here. And not only this, but the king has put one of his mercenaries or soldiers in the room with the prince. And this mercenary is the Discourager of Hesitancy. Basically, if the prince tries to back out or doesn't make a choice on anything in the matter, the Discourager, who has a scimitar, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, will probably kill the prince. And the prince falls in line in this moment and decides to go forward with everything. And so the next day for the wedding, the prince is blindfolded, forced to wear a hood of some kind so nobody can see his face. And he's told to marry one of the maidens that he can't even see at this point, but he can hear. And after the wedding, the king takes the prince to a room, and a bunch of maidens are lined up, and he's told that he has to make a choice with one of these maidens. He can't figure it out at first, but then he realizes that two women, one is smiling, one is frowning, and that there must be some meaning to this. He thinks like the smiling woman, like surely she recognized him and wants to marry him, and she's kind of hinting at the answer here. But it could also just mean that she's nice, or that she finds his facial features pleasant. Meanwhile, the frowning woman could be like saying, "Don't pick me, pick somebody else, because I'm not the choice." Or it could just be that she married him and now she's upset that he doesn't recognize her based on sight or like sound alone. And he's also wondering that if they do get married, if he chooses her, could she be able to hide her disdain if that wasn't actually the case, or something like that? Maybe she doesn't really like him. And so the prince is torn between these two choices, but the king says, you have to pick right now, or the woman who married you will become a widow. And the discourager is right there, and so the prince makes his choice. We do not find out his choice. The story then goes back to the king with the diplomats, and the king says to the diplomats that when you make your choice, let me know who you think the prince decided, and after that I will tell you what happened with the lady or the tiger situation. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there's a fair bit to talk about with the Discourager of Hesitancy. Very deeply layered metaphors here, I think, or just deeply layered messages within messages. But one of the main themes is that of the forced choice. So we like to believe that the prince, I think anyone wants to believe that the prince made their choice, and that they made it based on love, and that was their choice, and nothing else to really say about that. But the prince doesn't really have a choice in this matter, because it's being made by the king. Like, they weren't able to really choose who they married. The king made the choice in who they got married to. And then the king is putting him in an unwinnable situation, because any choice that he makes is based out of the fear that he's going to be killed, the fear that he might miss out on the opportunity to marry the person that he loves. He doesn't get to say, like, oh, this person is a match for me, let's marry them. He has to basically make it at gunpoint or scimitar point, because he will be killed if he maybe makes the wrong decision, or he doesn't make a decision at all. Or like if he hesitates, because who wouldn't hesitate in this type of situation? It's a very bizarre situation, and in a manner in which nobody really gets married. Many people are allowed to marry or meet the person who they're going to marry before they actually get married. So the discourager and the king are guiding the decision making in this process. And ultimately, the decision is not made out of love. It is made out of fear. Fear that you might be killed. Fear that you might choose the wrong woman in this case. It's not about hope. It's not about joy. It's not about being with somebody in that matter. It's about the fear of losing your own life in the process. It's more of a selfish kind of thing. But maybe in realizing that, maybe that's exactly what Stockton is trying to say, that our decisions about love, that our decisions about who we want to marry are largely based in fear or largely irrational. That maybe they are selfish, because maybe it's not like who we want to marry. If it was truly about love, it was truly about the other person, we would just go blindly into a room and marry somebody. But it's not. It's like we see that person, and it's always in relation to how we feel with them. And so maybe that love is always about us. And maybe we're always guided by fear of missing out, fear of not being able to fall in love, fear of being left alone, or something like that. And that's what love truly is. I don't necessarily think I agree with that, but it's interesting that seems to be where Stockton is taking the story, or what he's trying to say here. If you disagree, or if you agree with Stockton here, let me know in the comments below. I would definitely enjoy hearing from you. So I think Stockton also presents an interesting question in that who does the prince pick here? Does the prince pick the woman who smiled at him, or does he pick the woman who frowned at him? And why would he pick either of those women? Because again, if he picks the woman who's smiling, maybe that's her indicating that it was actually her that he married. That she's smiling because she wants to be with him. So would you be with somebody who wants to be with you? Even if maybe like you didn't feel like it was that great of a match, or would you pick the woman who frowned, who like is unhappy that you maybe don't recognize her, but could be happy once you're together? Maybe you're worried that she might not be able to hide certain aspects of her disdain, or just non-compatibility, or something like that. So, like, who does the prince choose here? Or maybe he picks someone else entirely for a third reason. But ultimately, the choice is between those two women. So, who does the prince pick in this situation? And I think that reveals a lot about what we look for in relationships as well, but also the irrational nature of relationships, and kind of determining like who we want to marry, who we want to be with based on these kind of qualities alone, on whether someone smiles or frowns at you. Again, another question to pose to you out there: who do you think the prince picks, and why do you think they pick that person? The last thing we're talking about is the relation to The Lady and the Tiger. Obviously, this is described as a sequel to The Lady and the Tiger. Not in a traditional sense. It doesn't carry on with the same characters, but it kind of shares similar ideas. And I think what Stockton is trying to point out here is that the diplomat's answer reveals how they think about love. And what they think, love should be. Should love be something that, you end up with someone who's frowning, maybe doesn't look right away, but it might be a little bit pessimistic, like with the frowning woman, but, it could work out, maybe. Or is it joyful and happy, and, you want to be with somebody who loves you? Who's very clear in their intentions and whatnot. And so the diplomat's answer will reveal a lot about them and what they think about love, which is where the story was going with The Lady or the Tiger. But, I think if you answer one or another, you're kind of revealing how you would answer with The Lady or the Tiger. Because again, if you're more pessimistic, you might say that the woman told her commoner boyfriend to pick the tiger door in the hopes that he would die and that she wouldn't have to share him with anyone else. But maybe if your answer is more joyful, you might think that the princess told her commoner boyfriend to pick the door with the lady behind it, because even though she wouldn't end up with him, he would still experience love and maybe believe more positively, more optimistically about the potential of love to exist. So I kind of see what Stockton is getting at this story, but I also think that in some way it does undermine the previous story by just one, kind of enmeshing it in a deeper layer of messaging and metaphor, not really giving us a straight answer, because it's like, why wouldn't a king just answer directly and say this is what happened, especially when the king, as we were told in the previous story, sort of prioritizes or loves kind of forcing people into these sort of complicated situations. They would love to share what actually happened as a way of cementing their authority even more. But it also undermines the previous story because, again, you're sort of giving us more about the answer. And rather than being a simple, yes or no question, it becomes even layered in even more metaphor. And I don't think it quite crosses over in the way that Stockton thinks it does, but it is a sort of interesting additional layer to the overall story. So I like it, but I do think it kind of undermines everything to some sense. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Discourager of Hesitancy by Frank Stockton. Pretty solid short story, even if I don't think it necessarily fully adds to The Lady or the Tiger. I think it's still worth reading and gives us a lot to consider. I definitely recommend that you go click on the link to it in the description and tell me what your thoughts are, and what you think about love in that sort of way, and what you think your choice would have been as well. A lot worth discussing, and I think that's the purpose of these Short Story Tuesday videos, is to discuss some interesting short stories. But other than that, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As I said before, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about Frank Stockton or the short story if they don't already know. Also join the Discord if you want to have further conversations about this sort of thing. There's a link in the description. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and forced choice travels. Farewell.